President Obama began rallying supporters around his immigration reform plan this week. Also, a bipartisan plan out of the Senate, reportedly similar, is also gaining momentum. So here to talk about the economic impact is Cecilia Munoz. She is director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. Thanks so much for being with us. So first, President Obama is calling for a path to citizenship for 11 million folks who are here now illegally. What impact does this have on the job market? More documented workers, both high and low skilled, now vying for jobs.
Well, it's very, very clear in economic circles that the impact of an immigration reform would be to create jobs. What we know about immigrants that come legally, as well as the folks that are here illegally, is that their impact is to really spur innovation, spur economic development, and spur the creation of jobs. So it's not a zero-sum game where for each immigrant that comes in, somebody else isn't getting a job. In fact, the whole point is job creation, entrepreneurship. There are visas in the president's proposal for entrepreneurs that are starting up companies that would be creating jobs. The whole impact here is good for the economy, good for job growth, good for the country.
Creating jobs how, though? I understand if an entrepreneur is coming over to start a business, but for immigrants perhaps who are here now, who are working in restaurants, working in construction, working any number of jobs, perhaps even being paid under the table, if they now are documented workers, how does that create jobs?
Well, so you have to bear in mind that these are workers who are already here in those jobs, and as the president discussed yesterday in his remarks in Nevada, what we're talking about is making sure that those workers and those employers are all on a level playing field. His proposal is about holding employers accountable for who they hire to make sure that the people that they hire are in the United States legally. And it's about holding the workers responsible for getting on the right side of the law to make sure that everybody's on the same playing field following the same set of rules so that we can enforce wage and labor protections, so that we can enforce the law that says you have to be here legally if you're going to be in the American workforce. At the end of the day, that's good for jobs, that's good for the economy, it's good for the rule of law and for our country.
With more workers in the tax base, I want to ask if you've looked at what impact this would have on entitlements, if you've quantified, for example, how much more would be paid into Social Security.
Well, what we have looked at, and this is based on our experience with previous immigration reforms, is that for folks who would be going through the legalization process, they wouldn't be eligible for federal public benefits. That's consistent with previous laws, with our previous experience. And what we've also found is that people who come in as immigrants tend to use those benefits less than other folks in the United States. So we focused on the benefits piece, and the important thing is that folks wouldn't be eligible for the range of federally public services. But what we also know is that we want them to be taxpayers. Many of them are taxpayers already in that they're paying sales tax, and some actually pay income tax. But we want to make sure, again, in the spirit of everybody being on the same playing field, that everybody's paying taxes and that folks will, in fact, will be held responsible for paying their taxes in order to get through the legalization process.
And what about if the U.S. is perceived to be a more easy place to immigrate to, and perhaps more people are headed for the borders to immigrate? Will you need to beef up security at the borders, and what kind of money are we talking?
Well, this is an area where we've actually made tremendous progress under this administration. In fact, the border is as secure as it's been in the last 40 years. Net migration from Mexico, according to outside sources, at the moment is at zero. There have been huge investments in the border, in the interior, in our security, and those investments are really paying off. So enforcement will continue to be part of the president's focus, particularly in the workplace. Mm-hmm. One of the central pieces of the enforcement proposal that the president has put forward is to make sure that employers are able to verify reliably and efficiently that the people that they hire are here legally in the United States, and that's something that the president is proposing to make a standard all across the entire workforce, using a system that'll be easy for employers to use.
Let's talk about how likely this is to pass, because reportedly this issue of enforcement is a sticking point between the president's plan and Republicans. The Wall Street Journal reports the Senate proposal wouldn't allow people to qualify for citizenship until unspecified improvements in border security were met and a new system was in place to track people who arrive on legal visas. Again, the Journal says the White House explicitly rejects this. The Republicans insist on this. So how do you get past a roadblock like that?
Well, I think you're overstating the extent of difference here. I think, in fact, we haven't seen what the Senate is proposing except for very broad language and a set of principles, and we have not spoken to whether or not it works because we don't know exactly what it is. I think the story here really is how much agreement there is between what the president is proposing and what the bipartisan group in the Senate is proposing. The architecture of how enforcement works, the architecture of how legalization works, and the pathway to citizenship, and the architecture of the changes to the legal immigration system appear to have a great deal in common. And that's what gives us so much encouragement that we're going to be able to take these principles that the Senate put forward, the details that the president put forward yesterday, and craft legislation that's going to pass the United States Congress and that this president can sign.
All right, thanks so much for being with us.